I'm Shaun Cole, this is the Simpit, and today we're here to take on a pretty big challenge. I think it's a fair statement to say that we are faster with higher end sim racing gear than we are with the typical budget or starter set in today's sim racing world, but I did wonder by just how much. So I staged a little shootout, the least expensive sim racing solution that I could possibly recommend to a new sim racer versus a no holds barred setup that would cost over $5,000. So for this fight, in one corner, we have the Thrustmaster T128, a sub $200 starter set with a laughable amount of force feedback power. And in the other corner, the reigning champ, a Simucube 2 Pro Wheelbase with a GSI wheel rim matched with a Ricmotech GT Pro 3 pedals. All this mounted to a custom-built profile chassis with a few extras built in. Let me tell you, the odds and the betting for this fight are off the hook in Vegas. Now, thinking of a typical sim racing starter, they buy a wheel, they're just going to slap it on a TV tray, they're going to throw their pedals down on the floor, probably sit at a dining room chair in a rather uncomfortable driving position. And after testing a setup like that out, it was very difficult to drive the car. I could barely even keep the car on the track, let alone lay down competitive laps. And after that testing, I decided that this was starting to not really look like a fair fight. It was starting to look a little bit like me fighting Conor McGregor, not even close to a fair fight. So to even things out, because it really was the starter wheel set versus a pro setup, I decided to mount that Thrustmaster setup to my R seat, and having a great driving position and a solid mount changed everything. Now we can actually fairly test one setup versus the other. For this test, I decided to use two different cars to test things out. An easy-to-drive car like the Porsche 911 RSR, and then a much more difficult-to-drive car like the Lotus 49 to test out these wheel combinations. Knowing that I was going to perform better with the premium setup, I did all of my testing first with the premium setup and then used the basic setup in order to give it any extra advantage possible. I wanted to be able to run 10 consecutive laps without any off tracks, no spins, and of course no crashes, so we'd have the best lap times to compare to. I'd also use my driver feedback as part of the analysis as well. So the first thing I did was I learned each track to the point where I was at my maximum lap times, and then I would back it down to about 95%. That way, like an endurance race, you could run really consistent laps that were good, strong laps without any mistakes so that the comparison data would be best. I started things off with the Lotus 49 at Watkins Glen. I did some warm-up to get comfortable and then started my 10-lap timed run. During this time, I did have 2 or 3 sketchy moments. After all, the 49 is a difficult car to drive, but I was overall fairly consistent. With this super setup, I could drive with a certain level of confidence and could take the car deep into the corners even when driving at that 95% pace. I was pretty solid coming off the corners, and overall, it was a good run. I was running lap times in the mid to upper 106s on average. I then switched over to my budget setup, now on a decent platform, and again, I did some recon laps or some warm-up laps and then started my 10-lap run. I mentioned the Lotus 49 was a tough car to drive. Well, now it became downright scary at times. In this run, I lost count, but probably had 9 or 10 oh shit moments, and breaking into the corners was a total mystery. It was dangerous if I was pushing, and if I played it safe, finding the proper corner speed was tough. For the most part, I could drive off the corners better, and with a bit more confidence. But if anything went wrong, it ended up being a total lift to save the car versus just any kind of feathering ability. Over the 10 exciting laps, my average times were low 108s. To compare the data between the two runs, I did drop the fastest and the slowest lap from each 10-lap run, only measuring the 8 laps to make sure it was a little bit more narrow in our comparison. And we can tell that the premium setup was quite a bit faster in a few different ways of judging. There was a 1.485 second advantage per lap. This means that if it had been an 8-lap race, the premium setup won the race by nearly 16 seconds. I also focus on the differential between laps with the premium setup maintaining a 0.665 difference, and the basic setup was double that at a 1.285 second gap. Next up would be a slightly easier beast to tame, that being that Porsche 911 RSR, but I did follow the same procedure. I got myself to the point where I was at maximum lap times. I then backed it down to about 95% or endurance levels, and then I cooled myself down, did a little bit of warm-up, and then did my 10-lap runs starting with the premium setup. When driving at 95%, I could pretty much hit my marks with little effort. It was almost too easy, with only a couple of small mistakes and zero sketchy moments. Between the heavy brake pedal and the ABS brakes of the car, braking and setting up corners was easy and consistent. The traction control of the car made coming off the corners thoughtless, and I was able to drive with total confidence. It was pretty much a Sunday drive until I did start to notice my front tires going away a bit. I was averaging lap times in the ballpark of high 159s. Switching over to the basic setup was a much better experience than the Lotus 49. In the Porsche, I could actually drive the car fairly decently with a little bit of confidence. That is, until I started to push things. The braking was hard to master, but could be done well when you really nailed it. Overall, I did feel more comfortable and safer than the Lotus, but I still made lots of mistakes. This setup has potential in an easier car to drive, but any mistakes would wipe out another good lap time. My optimal was actually down to within 3 or 4 tenths of the premium setup, but I couldn't even get close to that to complete a lap. My average lap times over the run were about 2:01s flat. Looking at the premium setup in this scenario, we still had a 1.086 advantage per lap time, meaning if it had been an 8-lap race, we would have won the race by 10 seconds. The consistency in this car was even better for the premium setup, holding about 0.4 of a second variation. However, the basic setup actually got worse here, dropping to a whopping 1.3 second difference between lap times. I did mention that I felt the front tires going away slightly in the Porsche during this testing, so I did check out tire wear as well. Looking at the premium setup, I was down to about 86 to 88% front tire wear. And with the basic setup, I was down to 70% on the front tires, mainly due to locking up the brakes and overshooting corners as a result. The rear tires were about the same with both setups.
His way, my way. I was 6 seconds faster. Now buy me some lunch at the highway joint, Tim.
In the end, it was very clear. Money does buy speed. Well, duh, we are talking about racing here. Now, I have to admit, I was hoping for tighter or better results from the basic setup. I didn't realize just how far we've come, just how good our premium setups have gone, and what an advantage they've even given us over the years. Now, with the starter set, it was really the brake pedal that was the problem. I can assess 65% of the total lap time difference to that. It's not that perfect braking can't be achieved with the basic setup. With enough time, with enough practice, with enough muscle memory, with enough ankle dexterity, it could be done, just not by me. Just like some people probably could get around the track fairly well with a hand controller. Again, just not by me. And of course, this does change with the difficulty of the car to drive. The easier the car, the easier it is to drive with the basic setup, but again, we did see a bigger variance because it is still hard to hit that optimal on one complete lap. And I'm not letting the wheel off the hook here either. That extra 35%, we can definitely assess about 25% of that to the steering wheel and maybe 10% to the throttle pedal. Maybe it's more like 35%, but it wasn't 100% the problem of the brake pedal itself. The wheel performed well, but was very notchy and slow response when compared to the premium setup, but it still maintained at least a minimal level of predictability. When things were going well, the wheel felt fine, but when things went bad, the wheel did not have the ability to save the day when combined with these pedals. In doing this testing, it really made me appreciate my premium setup here. And you could do at least this well for a lot less money and still be in a premium setup that is going to get you that same effect. The ability to just jump in, immediately be comfortable, immediately have confidence, and just push right out of the gates. And I do understand that we all have to start somewhere. Some of us have budget limitations that's going to affect our purchasing power and our ability to buy premium gear. But again, I mentioned it, with enough practice, with enough dexterity and enough muscle memory, it is a drivable combination, and it does have potential, especially in the slower cars. With that said, a lot of starters, and myself included in this shootout, really do overlook the importance of a sim racing chassis. And it doesn't have to be a sim racing chassis. What it needs to be is a proper driving position that you're comfortable and you can activate the pedals and the steering wheel in the best way possible, giving that basic setup all the chances you can. So what have we done today? Well, we've proven the obvious. Money does buy speed in racing. I guess that's not really a big surprise, but we did find out by what kind of margin and where the differences actually lie. So I hope you've enjoyed this show today. Be sure to thumbs up if you did. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you can find out when we do another shootout video like this one. And most of all, thank you for watching. This is the Simpit. I'm Shaun Cole, and I'll see you on the track.